is as easy it is to mill flour into grains. Home grain milling, making your own grain, your own flour at home. That's what we're talking about today. As much as I planned and prepared for this, I probably won't say exactly the same things that I typed up that I'm going to say on the broadcast today, so you definitely want to refer to the print notes. This is the Mockmill, a home grain mill. We're going to talk about it more today, but first we're going to answer a lot of your questions that you submitted. And because I asked last week, what do you want to know about home grain milling? And Vicki K was brutally honest and admitted, sorry, but I think I'm too lazy to mill my own flour. And Teddy C said, I buy organic flour, so why should I mill my own? Well, honest questions, fair questions. Both of these gave me a laugh. But the fact is that these were just 2 of the nearly 200 replies I got. And what was clear to me in most of the rest of the replies that I got was that all of you are excited and overwhelmed by the prospect of milling your own grains at home, and you have lots of questions about it. So I compiled all those questions, and I realized there were so many that to do them justice, couldn't really answer them in one Ask Wardee. So I'm devoting the entire month of November, 4 episodes to going over your grain milling questions. Today's episode is the basics, things like why should you do it? So we'll answer Vicki and Teddy's questions. How do you store your grains? How do you store your flour? How does a grain mill work? What are the different types of grain mills? Which one should you buy? Where should you get your grain? Those are the basics that we'll cover today. In future episodes, so the rest of this month, we'll talk about specialty things you can do with grain mills, like gluten-free grains and fun and exciting things, and kind of not quite the basics, but related topics to milling. So that is what's ahead. So I'm thrilled you're joining me today, and do plan on catching the rest of the month's episodes because we're going to go way deep into home grain milling, and it's going to be an exciting journey. Okay, so let's get going with the first question here that I already told you that Vicki and Teddy were asking, which is, why should I do it anyway? And Vicki said she was too lazy to do it, and Teddy said he already buys organic flour, so why bother? Well, this is a great question to ask. In fact, you need to ask this question before you do anything, because you got to have a why. So I happen to have a whole bunch of reasons why it's good to mill your own flour, so we're going to get into that now. Number 1 is it's healthier. So the whole grain, for example, this einkorn grain, contains all of the nutrients of what God built into these seeds. And so the enzymes, the bran, the germ, the oil, and when it's ground into flour and it sits on a shelf, within 24 hours, a lot of the nutrients are lost. So if you grind your own and use it soon after grinding, you are getting the healthiest flour. Another reason, it's not rancid. So the germ of every grain contains the oil, and oils go rancid. When the grain is split and ground into flour, it can go rancid very quickly. So if you've ever tasted baked goods that taste bitter, or you've bought flour at the store and you've made like quick bread or cake or something out of it, and you just like, that doesn't taste that great, it could very well be the rancidity factor. So when you do fresh ground flours, you are getting not rancid. It's really good. Which, besides the taste, rancidity is just not healthy for us. Okay, it's lighter. So this freshly ground flour is so light and fluffy, it hasn't compacted and settled down, so you will get lighter and fluffier baked goods. Do you ever wonder why when you see a cake recipe or a frosting recipe, they tell you to sift the flour? Well, that's to lighten it up because it's been sitting around a while. Well, if you're doing fresh ground flour, it's light already, so it just comes out lighter and fresher. Another one, it tastes better. So it's that rancidity thing. Our family has tried over and over again, or I should say it's been confirmed for us over and over again, that our baked goods with freshly ground flour taste so much better. And that's because it's not rancid. We can control what grains we're using. We can control just so much about it that we end up with a really, really tasty product. It's more frugal. So, and this especially pertains if you're doing gluten-free grains or you're doing ancient grains like we do with einkorn or spelt. So these are more pricey. And if you're paying the premium to get them already ground, it's more expensive. But if you can buy the whole grain, especially in bulk, you're going to save a lot of money on that superior quality grain that you want to use in your baking. So I'd say if you're using any kind of specialty grains like gluten-free or ancient grains, that right out the door, you want to consider your own grain mill, because you're going to save a lot of money over buying flour already done for you. You get more control. I alluded to this already, but if you are using your own grain mill, and especially a nice grain mill like this one, the Mockmill, you can control the fineness and the coarseness. So you have a lot of input over the quality of the flour that comes out. It's easier to store. So, and I'm not talking about the flour here, I'm actually talking about the raw ingredients that you use in your baking. If you are starting with whole grains and milling as you need, these whole grains store much more easily than if you were to purchase bulk in flour. Plus, you have all the other issues with the health and the rancidity and whatnot. But bulk grains are much easier to store than flour, because they are they do store better, and so that makes it easier. And this reason is for Vicky, and Vicky's the one who said I'm too lazy to do that. So Vicky, milling your own grains into flour is easier than you think. If you're looking at mills like the Mockmill here that's super attractive and has this low profile and sits on the counter and looks really good, well, it is ready at a moment's notice, instantly, to fill with grain and produce flour. Like, how easy is that? Even the laziest person can see that it's way easier than you think to produce your own flour, not to mention all the other reasons that I just went into. So bottom line for me is that, why would you mill your own flour? All those reasons: the health and the frugality and the control, the not rancidity, the better flavor, having at a moment's notice what you need for baked goods. There's a ton of reasons to consider milling your own grains. I would love to hear from you. So if you're live right now in the comments, just add. If I've missed something, or if you resonate with any of those reasons, add them. If you're watching this later, at the show notes, askwardee.tv, episode 97, the comments are open for you there to come and chime in on why you mill your own grains, or why you would want to. Maybe you're not there yet, but something here has resonated with you. We'd love to hear it. So those are the answers, the multiple answers to why you would want to consider doing it anyway. I hope I've convinced you, because to me, it's a no-brainer. So let's move on to the next question today in the basics of home milling. And this one comes from Ed, Stacy, Carrie, and Helen. And basically it comes down to, they're asking, well, how do I store my whole grains and my milled flours? Yeah, you definitely want to consider the logistics of this, because it comes into question when you make any kind of major investment in technique or equipment or something you bring into your traditional food kitchen. You want to consider the logistics of it. So this is a very valid question. And Ed basically said, how do you store the whole grain? Stacy is saying, how long will freshly milled flour last? What are the good ways to store it to preserve its nutritional value? Carrie says she'd like the proper info on the storage of grains before they're milled and after. And she's also asking for info on sprouted grains. Helen is asking about nutritional information. Just how quickly do grains degrade once milled? Is it that bad to grind some ahead and store in the freezer? If I'm making something in the morning and then in the evening, can I leave the flour out all day? I wonder how quickly homemade flour goes bad. I keep leftovers in the fridge or freezer for things like roux. So, Ed, Stacy, Carrie, Helen, and anyone else having similar thoughts, let's cover this. Keep this in mind when you're storing either unground whole grains or flour. The enemies of them, meaning the things that are going to cause them to degrade, rot, spoil, lose their nutritional value, are oxygen, temperature, moisture, light, and critters. Okay? So whenever you're coming up with a storage solution, you got to take into account all those enemies. Now, here's the particulars of each. So if you're talking about the whole grains, okay, how to store them, which much easier to store than flour, which is one of the reasons we talk about just grinding as much flour as you need for that day or a couple days. So the whole grain, when you order it, and if you do in bulk, you can get great prices, but of course, buy what you need. You bring it home and you want to freeze it for 10 days. And what that does is it kills any critters or eggs that are like on the grains themselves. So freezing is important if you want them to last long term. Then you can just keep them in the freezer, or you can transfer them to storage containers. Now, when you're storing them, you don't want to store them anywhere where it's moist or light or damp. Examples would be a hot attic, a damp basement, a humid garage. Those aren't good places. Put them in like 5-gallon food grade buckets, glass jars. You can introduce Mylar, those Mylar sealing bags. We use those a lot, oxygen absorbers, or just buckets. But the better they're kept away from moisture and oxygen and light and critters, and the more even the temperature is, so not huge fluctuations between hot and cold, but generally cool, the longer they're going to last. In fact, they will keep many, many years if they're kept at an even temperature, free of oxygen, free of moisture, in the dark, and not accessible to critters. So in big buckets that are, critter proof, basically. Your sprouted grains, not ground into flour, should be stored similarly. That's how you keep your whole grains. Now, when you're talking about your milled grains, meaning they're in terms of flour, I just ground this. So if I'm going to keep this at room temperature, I'm going to use it within 3 days. Really, ideally within 24 hours though. I could refrigerate it for up to 7 days to keep it fresh, and I could freeze it up to 6 months to keep it fresh. Your milled grains really shouldn't be kept at room temperature for more than 3 days because of the danger of rancidity. And although your sprouted flour lasts longer than unsprouted flour, I still follow these same rules. 3 days at room temperature, 7 days in the refrigerator, or 6 months in the freezer. I follow those same rules with sprouted flour just to keep it simple. Okay, so that's how you store it. Okay, next question. I should say, how's everybody doing? I can't see the comments, but if you're on Facebook Live, I bet Danielle's keeping up with you. And hopefully everybody can hear me loud and clear. The AskWardee.tv is open, ready now with everything I'm sharing, so you can read along or bookmark it. It is a lot of information. Look for episode 97. Next question, what grains can be milled into flour? This comes from Renee G. She says, what grains can be milled? Also, Kimberly is asking, do some grains work better than others in mills? And Crystal says, one of my wish list items is a grain mill. I've heard that some mills don't take sprouted grains. I want to buy a very high quality mill, but I will be devastated if I get it and then find out it doesn't take sprouted grains. Amen to that. You want to make sure whatever mill you're considering can do the foods that you want to mill, right? So that's great, Crystal, that you're looking into that. So here's some answers. And you definitely want to, because I can't possibly confirm this with every mill on the market, so you definitely want to just, if you've narrowed it down to a couple mill choices, confirm that the things you want to mill can be done in that mill. So you're going to find differences in mills between what they can and cannot grind up. Nearly all mills, unless you're using a high-powered blender like the Vitamix, will have a hard time with wet or oily foods. So whether it's a wet grain or nuts or seeds or spices, they can all be ground, but it depends on the equipment. And nearly all, really the blender mills are going to be the ones that can do the oilies. And there's one other exception, but that's really, the big thing you want to watch out for. Now, some foods are soft enough, and some foods are soft and oily, but in the case of soft foods, like flax seeds or chia seeds or rolled oats or coconut, they can be done in small batches in a coffee grinder, a food processor, or a blender. So as a general rule in our house, I'm using the grain mill for hard things like our grains, like our einkorn, because it makes this Mockmill makes great flour and it's well suited for that. And if I'm just doing a small quantity of like flax seeds or chia seeds ground or some rolled oats ground into flour, I just generally bring out the coffee grinder or the Vitamix for that, just a quick batch to do those. So bottom line here is that as long as it's not wet or oily, most grain mills are going to do everything. But you want to check with the manufacturer on whether or not it can do oily, and you also want to check on whether or not it can do corn or popcorn, because that's very hard and can damage some mills. So you want to make sure to find out if your mill in particular can do that. So today I am demonstrating here for you with this Mockmill, and this Mockmill can do all the dry grains, soft or hard wheat, oat groats, rice, triticale, kamut, spelt, einkorn, buckwheat, barley, rye, millet, teff, quinoa, amaranth, sorghum, field corn, and fully dried sprouted grains. So Crystal, there's your answer on the Mockmill at least. It will also grind beans like lentils, pinto, red, garbanzo, kidney, and more. And it'll also do dry, non-oily spices. So that's cool. You wouldn't be able to do herbs, oily seeds, popcorn, or fibrous materials in here. Been talking about why you'd want to mill your grains, what things you can mill, how to store. But now let's talk about the different kinds of mills and their pros and cons, because you're really going to need this information if you're ready to make a mill purchase. You want to make an informed decision and choose the right mill for your needs. Stephanie's asking, I have a Nutri mill. Are the stainless grinding blades doing damage to the nutrition of the grain? Should I have gotten a mill with stone? So she's basically weighing the Nutri mill's an impact. She's weighing that versus a stone. Luann L says, I know nothing about milling grains, so it's all going to be new information. I would like to know to start the best equipment to use. Ellen is asking, how do you do it with a Vitamix? And Brian is asking for best electric and manual equipment options for milling grain. And there were lots more questions regarding equipment, but I think those were representative. So here we go, the types of grains. So the first one that we have is the Mockmill, and is an electric example of the stone mill type. And the Wonder Mill Junior Deluxe is an example of the non-electric stone mill type. By me saying stone mill, I think you can guess that inside the mill there are stones that are grinding your grains into flour. So it's a very age-old thing. There are stories of my grandmother. I was named after her in, years and years ago in a small village in Israel, and all the families would grind their grain on the village stone mill. So they'd make their daily bread, but they'd grind their flour at this community stone mill. Well, how cool is it today that we can have this beautiful age-old process in our own kitchens, a stone mill? In stone mills, you can adjust the grind from very fine to coarse. You can even crack grains. The milling speed is on the slow side. The flour comes out cool, which is awesome because warmth means nutritional loss. If the grains are higher in moisture or oil, the stones could overheat. They could become glazed, so you do want to be aware of that. And generally don't do oily, but some grains are grains naturally have oil, so there's going to be oil content. And if the stones do become glazed, it needs to be cleaned, and the Mockmill will clean very easily just by running some dry grain through afterwards. So I love that if that ever happened, I could take care of it pretty well. In stone mills, you can do dry grains and legumes. One like the Mockmill will also do nuts and seeds and spices. Avoid the oily, like we've been talking about. You can find stone mills that are electric, like this one, the Mockmill. You can find them that are manual, non-electric, like the Wonder Mill Junior Deluxe. And this one in particular, the Mockmill, offers a KitchenAid attachment. So if you have a KitchenAid mixer and you want a stone mill, you can get an attachment to put right on your mixer. That's pretty cool. Okay, next type of mill is the impact or micronizing mill, such as the Nutri mill. So an impact mill has these an internal milling chamber, and it has concentric rings of these stainless steel fins, and there's lots of them. And they never touch, but they're spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute. And what happens when you run your grain through it is that they burst the grains into a fine flour. Okay, and this happens upon impact. And so that's why they're called impact mills. They do produce fine flour very quickly, but they can't crack grains. So there's really only two downsides to the Nutri mill, and I have had one. So they're very loud. And second, they do emit a flour dust. So people with respiratory issues may have issues because there's fine dust in the room when they're used. You can mill very dry grains and legumes in an impact mill, and they are only electric, available only as electric. We have two more general types to go over. The next one is steel or cast iron burr. So it's similar to stone, except that the grinding mechanism is going to be cast iron or steel. An example would be the Wonder Mill Junior Deluxe, because it not only comes with stone, but it comes with steel burrs, so it has both. And the Family Grain Mill. So this really works similar to the stone mills, except that you have steel or cast iron doing the grinding. They can grind dry grains and legumes and oily nuts and seeds, so that's better than the stone in that sense. But generally the results are coarser, so you're not going to get as fine a flour. Pretty much with any. I have a friend who has the family grain mill, and she runs her grain through twice, and her flour is still not as fine as this stone mill or with an impact mill. You can get both electric and non-electric of the steel or cast iron burr mills. Your last kind of type is a high-powered blender like the Vitamix or the Blendtec. It's an amazing machine. The Vitamix has a dry container. The Blendtec, you just use the regular container. I did this for years and years. We made flour in our Vitamix before we had a standalone mill. So I do know that the flour comes out more coarse, but if you don't have a lot of flour needs, and it's just like occasionally, and we actually had a lot of flour needs, so we relied on it all the time. But basically, you can repurpose or use your Vitamix or Blendtec as a grain mill, but it does come out more coarse. One advantage is that you can do oily things because it will do that. One caution with the Blendtec is that a lot of Blendtecs don't come with a tamper, and I'm not familiar with all the models, but the tamper is the thing that you can push down to keep it circulating, and the Vitamix always comes with that. Well, that's crucial to getting a consistent grind. So with the Blendtec, I would recommend that you get a model that has a tamper or you purchase it as an accessory because I think it's essential if you want the Blendtec to grind well for you. Other options really, which I don't recommend, but I'm just going to give them a nod if you're not milling often, if you don't need large quantities or you don't desire a great result, you could use the Champion juicer attachment. You could use the KitchenAid attachment. I'm not talking about the Mockmill KitchenAid attachment. I mean the one that KitchenAid makes. It's not a very good mill. Or a coffee grinder. So those are some things that people use for grain grinding that I just don't think are very good. My experience really quickly, for years we used the Vitamix to grind flour, and we did a lot of bread baking, and it served us very well. I never overfilled it, so if you're familiar with the Vitamix at all, the manual says do 2 cups of grain at a time. I never went over that. It's very important you don't go over that. And I also ground for 15 seconds longer than recommended while using the tamper the whole time. And that way we got as good a flour as I could get. And we made great bread with it. I later learned when I got a Nutri-Mill that I'll talk about next that the Vitamix flour was just coarser. There was nothing I could do about it. I did get as good as I could get with the Vitamix. So then we purchased a used Nutri-Mill, which is an impact mill. So the grains are whipped through that those steel fins that are just going really fast around and around. So the Nutri-Mill was next. The flour came out very fine. It made beautiful bread. It wasn't so hot as the Vitamix. That's another downside of the Vitamix. The grains come out hot. The Nutri-Mill did not produce as much hot flour, so that was an improvement, less of a nutrient loss. It's very loud though. My daughter Hania now has the Nutri-Mill. And now we are using the Mockmill stone grain mill, which I absolutely love. The flour stays cool. It comes out very fine. It also can do the cracked grains or the coarse grains, so you have a lot of adjustability there. So we get really light, wonderful bread. We get cracked grains for porridges. We can do gluten-free grains. We can do spices. So of all the mills that I've used and reviewed, this is my favorite because I think it produces the best result, the healthiest flour, and it has the most versatility for what I need. I do also want to say that we have a non-electric stone mill, which is the Wonder Mill Junior Deluxe. So if there was ever a power outage or whatnot, we do have an option to use a stone mill in the case of not having electricity. So that's kind of our backup mill. And the Wonder Mill Junior Deluxe also has, like I said before, it comes with both stone and steel burrs. So we can do stone for something like this, and we could do steel if we needed to grind oily things. So I kind of really like having both of those. One as a backup and this for everyday use. Whew, that's a lot of information. I need a drink. Getting hoarse here. Next question. How does a grain mill work? So we're still talking logistics here and just thinking practically, because if you're considering a purchase or getting into it, you want to know how it works. Heather is asking, I would love to know all about grains, including sorghum, millet, teff, quinoa, oats, and the soaking rinsing process. Some grains like quinoa, rice, and sorghum say to rinse before cooking, but what about before grinding? I assume they're dirty and need to be rinsed before grinding. Okay, well, how you grind your grains really depends on the particular mill. I described all the mechanisms above because they all are going to function a little bit differently, but there's a reservoir to put your grains, there's a button to turn it on. If it's a Vitamix, you need to be tamping, stuff like that. But they all involve some universal steps. And the first of which is you have to read your manual so you know the safe operating instructions for your mill and you know what can and cannot be milled. Okay, so this is the Mockmill instructions. Generally, you do need to start with clean grain. Now, this does not mean rinsing because you don't want to introduce wet. Even if like a Vitamix could grind something wet, but then you're not going to end up with flour, you're going to end up with paste. So everything needs to be dry if you want to have flour, and it needs to be dry with most mills. So cleaning means inspecting your grain. You can put it in a shallow bowl or pan and just move it around and remove rocks or debris. How much rocks or debris really depends on the farm. We've gotten grains that have a lot of like stones and wood in them, chaff, and we've gotten very clean grain, which einkorn.com has very clean grain that has very little debris or rocks in it. The most important thing to remove are rocks because they can damage your mill. So that's the cleaning you need to do. Now, quinoa is a special case because it has a bitter coating called saponin, and that's why they say when you're cooking quinoa to rinse it under cool water for 2 minutes, so you remove that away. Well, you have two options here. One is that you rinse that grain and you dry it out like in a dehydrator before you mill it, or you just skip the rinsing and mill it with the bitter coating. I guess you have a third option, which is some quinoa comes pre-rinsed. So like Costco has bags of pre-rinsed organic quinoa, and maybe there are farms out there now who are doing the pre-rinsing for you. So that's really 3 options there. But no matter what, you are just going to be picking through your grain to remove debris and keep it dry. So I'm going to turn it on because it's very, very simple. This is the Mockmill. That's basically how easy it is. I do have a video embedded at the show notes, askwardee.tv, that shows you how the Mockmill works. Now, next question, where to buy a grain mill? So as you can tell from our discussion today, this is my favorite grain mill, and it works great. I must have done something wrong. So the Mockmill is a home-stone grain mill. It was engineered and manufactured in Germany by Wolfgang Mock, and Wolfgang Mock is like the father of stone mills. So back in the 1970s, he started making them. He's been doing it for nearly 40 years, or more than 40 years, and 70% of the stone mills on the market are really made by him. He's really, really good at them. And this mill is super exciting because brought the price down so it's affordable, mainly because it doesn't have a wood housing, it has recycled material housing, and he's brought it down to a price that home cooks can afford. Other stone mills tend to be more expensive. The flour is super fine, it's healthy because it's fresh ground, it's cool to the touch, and it makes wonderful light bread, and I also love it that it cracks grains. So, and it will grind all grains, even gluten-free, and you can do the spices like I was talking about before. If you want information on the Mockmill, you go to tradcookschool.com/Mockmill, where Mockmill is all one word. And I also want to mention that if you do purchase the Mockmill, you're going to get 2 guides from Mockmill. One is it's called the Mockmill Farm Directory and Grain Milling Guide. So it gives you information on the different grains and everything else you can do in the Mockmill, and it also gives you links to farms and resources to find high quality grains for your home. There's also the Mockmill Recipe Guide, which is a whole bunch of really nice recipes that they've collected using home milled fresh ground grains. And for a limited time, I'm also throwing in something from me. So if you purchase the Mockmill, I'm also going to give you 2 of our ebook and video packages, Sourdough A to Z and Einkorn Baking. They're worth $128 together, and you get them free when you purchase the Mockmill. Now, Mockmill is not providing that. You do have to claim them from me. So once you purchase your Mockmill, then you go to this page, tradcookschool.com/millbonus, where millbonus is all one word, and you can input your order number and your name and email, and then you'll get instant access. Just basically right away you can download the sourdough and the Einkorn Baking ebook and video packages from me. Now, final question that we're going to cover in today's episode: where to buy whole grains for milling. So einkorn.com is actually my favorite place. And there's a link with this episode where you can get their very best prices. Although a little caveat there is if you're a member of Traditional Cooking School, you can actually even get a better price from einkorn.com because we have an exclusive member special in the member area. But definitely use my link that's at the show notes or that's with this video to check out the best prices at einkorn.com. This is what we use exclusively in our baking. As you can see, einkorn.com. Amazon.com, at the show notes, I have a pre-formed link for you that says search for organic bulk whole grains, because there's a lot of farms, really good quality farms, that have their grains for sale on Amazon, so you can do that. Azure Standard is a bulk natural food warehouse that has truck delivery all over the country, and they may or may not have delivery where you live, but if you go to their site, you can fill out a contact inquiry form and find out if there's a buying group in your area, and you can get access to ancient and modern grains, all kinds of bulk grains from Azure Standard. Local farms. I'm saying this fourth, but it's definitely something you want to seek out first. So the Mockmill has their farm directory that you can check out, but you can also just Google or ask around locally, see what you turn up. There are fantastic local farms where you can buy grain directly from them at really high quality. We did this when we were in Oregon. We purchased from some farms in Oregon and Washington. There's one in Canada. So just depending on where you live, hopefully you can find a local source. If you can't though, like I said, einkorn.com and other farms are making their grains available far and wide through the benefits of the internet. It's just wonderful. Okay. Oh, I did want to say, if you're interested in home grain milling, this particular flour does great in my no-knead einkorn sourdough bread recipe. You can get that at tradcookschool.com/no-knead, NOKNEAD. The information on the Mockmill, which I highly recommend, is tradcookschool.com/mockmill, MOCKMILL, all one word. And if you do purchase it, be sure to grab my free ebooks that I'm giving along with it at tradcookschool.com/millbonus, MILLBONUS. I've also mentioned einkorn a lot, so you may be wondering, what's the deal with einkorn? Well, einkorn is the healthiest variety of wheat. It's 5,000 years old, way before hybridization and selection took place. So it's a much healthier form of wheat, and we use it exclusively in our baking. So there's a link to a podcast I did on why I love einkorn. So if you're interested in kind of diving into that and checking out what einkorn is all about, you'll find that link at the show notes. I want to give thanks to 2 people, actually 3. So first is Vicki Lynn Haycraft. She's my milling mentor. So many years ago, when we started getting into whole grains and milling our own flour, I learned nearly everything I know from Vicki Lynn Haycraft. She's been a wonderful source of information on storage and milling and review and mill types, and just fantastic. So thank you so much, Vicki Lynn, for starting me and our family on this journey. And the other 2 people I want to thank are Wolfgang Mock, the maker of this wonderful mill, and Jade Coyle from einkorn.com. Both of them have been instrumental as well, from providing the grain to providing wonderful milling options for the home mill. So all of this information here today and in the coming weeks is really the accumulation of wonderful people who are putting their heart and soul and their passion into providing great options for us home bakers to provide healthy and easy baked goods for our families. So I'm so grateful, and I know you are too. Well, this has been Ask Wardee. Thank you so much for joining me. Come back next week, same time, same place. You can get all the links and everything I've shared today at askwardee.tv. Just look for episode 97 and keep an eye out in the coming weeks for the rest of this home milling series. God bless you all. Bye-bye.